Joining me now from Beijing is Einar Tangen. He's a political and economic affairs commentator. So, Einar, how important was this process of repatriation, which took years for China and South Korea to finally make it happen?
Well, Elaine, it's very important. I mean, coming on the contrast between what's happening in Japan right now with Suga expressing sorrow at what happened, but not expressing regret for the atrocities that were committed between 1894 to 1945. So, you have very different things. South Korea has expressed, this very, very important idea of returning these soldiers who fought in the war back to China. And I think it reflects not only in terms of the feelings between these three countries, but also the political and economic realities.
Well, there aren't a lot of people left from this time period. We're seeing mostly descendants. So talk to us about making sure that this history isn't forgotten, especially with young people. And you talk about the differences with South Korea and Japan, but how do you make sure that young people today really understand the history and the importance of this?
Well, that's not just a question for China. It's also a question for the entire world at a time when you have people who are denying the Holocaust, when you have leaders who refuse to take responsibility. This is sending the wrong message. History is not something that can be rewritten. The facts are what they were. The brutality that occurred should never occur again. But once again, you're hearing the siren calls of misplaced nationalism, and especially in developed world, always criticizing China simply because it's been successful. It's important to remember just how terrible these tragedies were. And the only way you can do that is through teaching them the history, by having them go to these shrines and memorials and observe that these were real people, seeing the photographs, etc. It is not helpful that in Japan, many leaders, including the former prime minister, went to the Yakushoni shrine, which is housing a bunch of war criminals from that period, and they're choosing to honor them. That is not the way to go forward.
And I need to ask you about some new headlines coming out of Tokyo with the current prime minister announcing that he will not run again, stepping down basically at the end of this month. With talk of various people possibly taking on that role, do you see any change in Japan on their stance on this?
No, unfortunately, I don't. The party is still in the ascendancy. He's taking responsibility in the Japanese fashion by sacrificing himself. I don't know that the party is in trouble. There is not a formidable opposition. You could see changes, but there would be nuanced changes as opposed to anything really structural or very large. The Japanese do not want to remember the war or what happened to it. As you can see, by the way they're memorializing this, it's all about the sorrow that they've caused internally. Some remarks, especially by the emperor, saying that this was a terrible thing and should never be repeated again. But unfortunately, like I said, on the political front, there's not really enough remorse being shown.
All right, Einar Tangen, always great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us from Beijing.